The wind carried dust across the wide prairie, whispering through dry grass and rattling the wooden fences of a lonely ranch that stood against the endless horizon. The sky stretched open and bright. But beneath its vastness there was always the sense of something hidden, something waiting. It was a land of cattle drives, wagon tracks, and hard men with harder hands. But for those who lived on the edge of the frontier, danger did not always ride in on horseback from the open plains. Sometimes it was much closer. Sometimes it waited within the very walls of a home. The rancher's daughter had grown up with the rhythm of the land, the creak of saddle leather at dawn, the sharp call of a rooster, the smell of dust and horse sweat that clung to everything. She knew how to ride, how to mend fences, and how to shoot if she had to, though her father never liked to see her with the rifle. Yet, for all her strength, she carried a gentle spirit. She noticed things others did not, like the way the cattle shifted nervously before a storm or the faint trails of smoke curling from campfires hidden beyond the ridge. And when the day came that she found a captured Apache tied to a rough post in the clearing, it was that quiet awareness that made her stop and look closer instead of turning away. No one had told her about the prisoner. No one needed to. She could see the story written in the dust, the boot prints of men who had dragged him there, in the sharp gouge of a stake driven deep into the earth. The Apache sat silent, his head bowed, long hair tangled over his shoulders. His hands were bound tight behind him, raw from the coarse rope. There was no crowd to watch, no soldiers standing guard, just the figure of a man who had been left for death in the open sun. Her heart pounded as she studied him. She had been told all her life that Apaches were dangerous, that they raided wagons and ranches, that they could not be trusted. Yet when she looked at him, she saw no wild beast, no ruthless enemy. She saw a human being, weary but unbroken, his dark eyes lifting slowly to meet hers. For a long moment neither moved, the silence of the prairie pressing in around them. Something stirred inside her, something she could not name. She remembered her father's words, his warnings that mercy on the frontier could cost lives. Still, she stepped closer. Her fingers shook as they brushed against the rope. She knew this choice could bring ruin, yet she also knew she could not walk away. The knife she carried at her belt came free, the blade catching a sliver of sunlight as she slid it against the fibers. With one sharp motion, the rope snapped apart, falling at his feet. The Apache did not speak. He did not run. He only held her gaze with an intensity that made her chest tighten. In that look was a question, perhaps even a warning. But before she could think what it meant, she heard the heavy sound of boots striking the dirt behind her. She turned, expecting her father or one of the ranch hands. But what she saw rooted her in place. It was not an enemy from the hills or a stranger from the trail. It was someone she had known all her life. Someone who sat at her family's table. Someone whose voice she heard every day within the house. And in his hand was the same coiled rope she had just cut away. Her mind reeled. The image of the bound Apache flashed before her. And now it all made sense, the way the prisoner had been left alone, the way no one had spoken of him. The executioner was not a faceless man from some distant fort. He was here, in her home, walking the same floors, eating the same bread. Trusted and welcomed like kin. The daughter's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the words would not come. She could only stand frozen as the dust swirled around her ankles. As the wide sky pressed down heavy with secrets, the Apache shifted, rising slowly now that his hands were free, his posture straightening with quiet strength. His presence filled the space between them. Not with violence, but with an unspoken truth that everything she thought she understood about this land, about loyalty and family, had been split open in an instant. Her rescuer's heart, the instinct that had guided her to cut that rope, now left her standing at the edge of a deeper danger. She had chosen mercy, but mercy carried consequences, and she could feel them gathering like storm clouds across the horizon. The man with the rope tightened his grip. His eyes locked on hers with a hardness she had never seen before. For the first time she realized she was not just the rancher's daughter, not just a girl standing in the shadow of men's choices. She was the one who had changed the story with a single cut. and now the story would not turn back. The Apache's gaze shifted between her and the figure holding the rope. His silence was a weight, a promise of things unsaid, but the truth was clear, even without words. There was no safety here, no certainty of who stood as ally or enemy. The prairie stretched endless and open around them. But her world had suddenly narrowed to this single moment. This single decision, the rancher's daughter felt the air grow thick, heavy with all that could happen next. She did not know if she had freed a man who would bring ruin, or if she had uncovered a darkness closer than any raid or ambush. All she knew was that the next breath, the next word, would shape everything. And in that tense silence, standing between the Apache and the executioner who lived under her own roof, she realized that nothing about her life, her family, or this land would ever be the same again. The prairie held its breath. The daughter's hand still clutched the knife she had used to cut the Apache free, though now it felt heavier than iron. The man with the rope stood only a few paces away, his shadow stretching long against the fading light. His face, once so familiar, now seemed carved from something cold and secret. She had never thought to question him before. He had always been there helping with cattle, mending fences, speaking to her father with quiet loyalty. Yet here he was, revealed not as a helper, but as the one who had bound another human being and left him for execution. Her heart raced as she tried to understand. Why had he done this? Who had ordered it? Her father had spoken often of the dangers of Apache raids, but he had never mentioned keeping a prisoner, never hinted that one of his own men was capable of carrying out such a grim act. The Apache stood tall now, his hands marked by rope burns, his chest rising and falling with slow control. His silence was louder than words. He did not thank her, nor did he run. He simply stood between them, eyes sharp, as if weighing every detail. There was no fear in him, only a calm strength that unsettled her more than anger ever could. The man with the rope finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You should not have done that." His gaze flicked toward the Apache, then back to her. "You don't know what you've set loose." She wanted to ask who the prisoner was, why he had been taken, but her throat was dry. The words stayed trapped behind her teeth. Instead, she stepped slightly in front of the Apache, her knife trembling in her hand, though she prayed it did not show. Her life had been built on trust in her father, trust in the men who worked the ranch, trust in the idea that the walls of their home protected them from what lay beyond. But now that trust was cracking, splintering under the weight of what she had seen. The days that followed did not erase the moment. They deepened it. The Apache lingered at the edge of her thoughts like a shadow on the horizon. She could not stop seeing the raw rope marks on his wrists, could not stop hearing the quiet warning in the rope man's words. At supper that night, the table felt different. Her father sat at the head, his broad shoulders stooped from the day's labor, his plate piled high. The men ate in silence, the clatter of forks the only sound. She kept looking at the rope man, watching his movements, wondering how no one else could see the darkness she now knew was there. He laughed once at a small joke, the sound ringing hollow. She forced herself to eat, but each bite seemed heavy, as though the truth she carried pressed down even on the simplest act. Her father noticed her silence. "Something troubling you?" he asked, his eyes kind but searching. She shook her head, not daring to speak. How could she explain? How could she accuse someone he trusted without proof? Her father had always believed that justice was clear and simple, but this was not simple. This was tangled in secrecy and danger, and she did not yet know what it meant. The nights grew restless. She would lie awake listening to the wind sweep across the open land, the creak of the wooden beams above her bed, the far-off howl of coyotes. In those dark hours, she thought of the Apache. Where had he gone after she cut the rope? Was he watching the ranch from the hills, waiting for revenge? Or was he a man wronged who sought only freedom? She wished she had asked him his name, wished she had heard his voice just once. By day, she noticed more. The rope man often disappeared for hours without reason, his horse's tracks leading toward the canyons. Once, she found a strip of cloth near the barn, patterned with beads unlike anything the settlers wore. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its worn edges, and hid it quickly in her pocket before anyone could see. It was a sign, though, of what she could not yet say. The tension grew thicker, like storm clouds that refused to break. She began to watch everyone more closely, searching for cracks in their familiar faces. Her father seemed weary, but honest, a man burdened by land and cattle, not by secrets. The ranch hands were rough, but ordinary, their talk of weather and wages predictable. Only the rope man carried that hidden weight, that silence that seemed too deliberate. One evening, as the sun burned low and painted the sky in streaks of red and gold, she wandered beyond the fences. The prairie was wide and quiet, the air heavy with dust. She walked to the clearing where she had first seen the Apache tied to the post. The rope lay in the dirt, frayed where her knife had cut it. She bent to touch it, the fibers rough against her skin, and a shiver ran through her. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be out here," she spun, heart racing. It was the rope man again, his figure outlined against the sinking sun. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something she could not read. "I wanted to see," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "See what?" he asked. She gestured toward the ground, the broken rope. "This." His gaze dropped to it, then back to her. For a moment he said nothing, only studied her as though deciding how much she knew. Finally he stepped closer. "That man was dangerous," he said. "You don't know what they've done. You don't know what he's done." She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the simplicity of his words, but something inside her pushed back. Then why leave him here? Why not tell my father? His jaw tightened. Some things are better handled quiet. The answer chilled her. Secrets were not the way of her father's house. If something was right, it was spoken of. If it was wrong, it was judged in daylight. But this was something else. She kept her knife at her side, though she did not raise it. "I saw him," she whispered. "He wasn't what you say." The rope man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. But instead he stepped back, his face hard. "You've made a choice you don't understand," he said. "And choices like that don't go unanswered." The words lingered in the air long after he turned and walked away. She stood frozen, the prairie stretching wide and endless around her, the fading light casting long shadows. She knew then that she had crossed into something dangerous, something that reached beyond her small world of fences and cattle. That night, she returned home, her heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. She did not speak of the encounter, not even to her father, but as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, she knew the days ahead would only grow heavier with secrets. The Apache was free now. Somewhere in the hills or valleys, carrying with him whatever truth he bore, the rope man still lived under her roof, his steps quiet but heavy with threat. And she, the rancher's daughter, stood between them. Her single act of mercy binding her to a story that had only just begun. The prairie wind moaned against the walls, and in its cry she heard the promise of reckoning. Something was coming, and when it did, it would change everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and the hidden cost of freedom. The days stretched long, heavy with silence, though beneath that silence the air seemed to hum with unease. The rancher's daughter tried to go about her work as she always had, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every sound, every shadow seemed sharpened, as though the world itself was waiting for something to break. She tended to the horses and carried water from the well. Yet her thoughts kept circling back to the same two men, the Apache she had freed, and the one who had tied him. Her father noticed her distraction, though he said little. He had grown used to her being quiet. But lately he watched her with a sharper eye, as if sensing that something troubled her. She wanted to tell him to pour out everything she had seen, but each time she tried, the words froze. She feared what it would mean if she spoke too soon. Would her father believe her? Or would he turn against her for doubting the man he trusted most on the ranch? At night, her dreams grew restless. She saw the Apache standing on the ridge, his figure tall and solitary, watching from the distance. She saw the rope man's eyes in the dark, always waiting, always silent. Some mornings, she woke with the taste of dust in her mouth, and the feeling that she was caught between two storms closing in on her from both sides. The tension in the household began to bleed into small moments. Once, when the rope man returned from the canyons, his shirt carried the faint smell of smoke, though no fire had been lit on the ranch. Another time she overheard two ranch hands whispering about missing cattle. Their voices uneasy, their eyes darting toward the hills. Nothing was said aloud, but the feeling grew that something larger was stirring beyond the fences. Something that reached beyond their simple lives of labor. The daughter could not forget the Apache's eyes when she cut the rope. There had been no fear in them, no plea for mercy. Only a quiet strength that unsettled her more than anger would have. She began to wonder about his story. Who was he? Why had he been taken? Was he truly dangerous, or had the rope man bound him for reasons no one dared speak? One evening she found herself walking farther from the house than usual. The prairie stretched wide under a pale moon, the grasses moving like waves in the wind. She came upon a ridge overlooking the valley and stopped, her breath catching as she saw a small fire flickering in the distance. Around it moved figure shadows of men. She could not tell if they were travelers, hunters, or warriors. But she knew one thing: the Apache was not gone. He was still out there, close enough to remind her that her choice had consequences that had not yet been measured. When she returned home, the rope man was waiting by the barn. His face was unreadable in the dim light, but his voice carried a weight she could not ignore. "You've been wandering," he said. She steadied herself. "I walk where I need to." His gaze lingered on her, sharp and unyielding. "Out there, the land remembers. It doesn't forget what's been done. You do well to keep close to home?" She wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone left little room for questions. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the house, though her steps were heavy. His words followed her, clinging like shadows. As the days passed, the signs grew harder to ignore. A ranch hand found an arrow embedded in a fence post near the grazing field. Another spoke of hearing voices in the night, carried by the wind. Her father dismissed it all as nerves, insisting the cattle needed tending more than rumors needed chasing. But the daughter felt the walls of her world narrowing, pressing in with every small discovery. The rope man grew quieter, more watchful. He no longer laughed at supper, no longer joined the other men in their talk. Instead, he studied her with an expression that made her skin crawl, as though he knew she carried a secret she could not hide. Sometimes she caught him glancing toward the horizon, toward the hills where the Apache might be waiting. She began to piece together fragments. The rope man had always been close to her father, yet his past was a mystery. He had arrived years before, asking for work, and had proven himself capable, strong, and loyal. But no one knew where he had come from. No one asked. Life on the frontier often left men untethered, wandering from place to place, seeking labor where they could. Still, she could not shake the thought that his loyalty was not as pure as it seemed. One night, when the house lay quiet and her father's snores filled the air, she crept to the barn. There, hidden beneath a stack of old saddles, she found a bundle wrapped in rough cloth. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open. Inside lay objects she did not recognize: a necklace of bone and beads, a strip of leather painted with patterns she had only seen on the garments of Apache warriors, and a knife unlike the ones carried by the men of the ranch. She stared at the items, her mind reeling. They were not trophies of battle, nor simple trinkets. They were personal, carried with meaning, and the rope man had kept them hidden. The realization shook her. He was not simply a ranch hand. He was connected somehow to the very people he claimed to despise, the very man he had bound and left to die. But why? Was he betraying the ranch to the Apache, or was he betraying the Apache to the ranch? She wrapped the items back in the cloth, her heart pounding. She knew she could not confront him yet. To do so without proof would be to risk everything. But now she carried a deeper secret, one that burned heavier than before. The days rolled forward, the tension unbroken. Rumors spread of raids farther west, of wagon trains attacked and settlers driven off their land. Each story tightened the knot in her chest. Was the Apache she freed part of this unrest? Or was he caught in something larger, something tangled with the rope man's hidden past. Her father grew restless as well. He began to speak of hiring more men, of strengthening the ranch against threats. Yet even as he planned, the daughter felt the danger was not outside their fences, but within them. Each time the rope man entered a room, the air grew heavier. Each time she caught his eyes, she saw not the face of a worker, but of a man carrying secrets too dark to be shared. One afternoon, while tending the horses, she heard a faint whistle from beyond the corral. She turned sharply, scanning the horizon. At first, she saw nothing, but then a figure appeared on the ridge-tall, solitary, framed by the endless sky. It was him, the Apache she had freed. He stood motionless, watching. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought he might approach, might speak at last. But before she could move, the sound of boots behind her made her turn. The rope man was there, his eyes following her gaze to the ridge. When he saw the figure, his face hardened. "He's still out there," he muttered. The daughter said nothing, her chest tight. She knew then that the circle was closing, that the bond between her choice and its consequences was tightening like a noose. The Apache, the rope man, her family, each thread was pulling together, weaving a story she could no longer step away from. The rope man's voice was low, almost a growl. "When the time comes, you'll understand what you've done." She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck. The ridge was empty now. The Apache had vanished as quickly as he appeared. Only the echo of his presence remained. Heavy as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and as the sun dipped low, staining the sky in fire and ash, the rancher's daughter realized that the true danger was not only what waited beyond the hills, but what lived under her own roof, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment to strike. The nights grew heavier as the ranch sat in uneasy silence. Every creak of the timber and howl of the wind pressing against the daughter's nerves. She had lived her whole life under the wide skies of the prairie, but now the land no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage set for something that had not yet arrived. Every shadow stretched too long, every sound carried warning. The Apache's figure haunted her memory. She could still see him standing on the ridge, tall and unyielding, as if he had been carved from the land itself. His silence lingered louder than words, a reminder that her single act of mercy tied her fate to his. At the same time, the rope man's presence grew heavier in the house. He moved with quiet steps, but she felt his eyes on her, watching, waiting. She wondered how long before he acted, how long before the secret she carried erupted into something her father could no longer ignore. Her father began reinforcing the fences, working the men harder than ever. He spoke often of rumors that drifted from travelers' stories of raids, burned wagons, and ranches left empty. He dismissed most of them as exaggeration, yet the worry in his eyes betrayed him. He did not know that the danger was closer than he imagined. The daughter kept her silence, though each passing day made it harder to bear. One morning, before dawn had broken, she crept to the barn again. The bundle she had found hidden beneath the saddles still lay where she had left it. She unwrapped it quickly, her fingers trembling as she touched the bone necklace. The painted leather, the blade that seemed alive with its own weight. These objects carried stories she could not yet read. But she knew enough to understand they tied the rope man to the Apache in ways her father could never guess. She wrapped them again and shoved them back into their hiding place, praying no one would discover she had touched them. Later that day, while mending a fence along the far field, she caught sight of something strange. Hoof prints, fresh and deep, led away from the ranch and toward the canyons. They did not belong to cattle. They were the marks of a single rider, heavy and deliberate. She knelt and touched the dirt, her heart tightening. The direction was too familiar. It was the path the rope man often rode when he disappeared for hours. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke. She rose quickly, scanning the horizon. At first she saw nothing, but then a thin trail of gray lifted from beyond the ridge. Someone was camped there, close enough to watch the ranch, close enough to strike if they chose. That night, she could barely eat. The supper table felt colder than ever. Her father tried to keep the men talking, but their words were short and distracted. Even the younger hands, usually quick to laugh, kept their eyes low. The rope man sat in silence, his fork scraping slow across the plate. His calmness unsettled her more than anger would have. He looked like someone waiting for a signal, someone who already knew how the night would end. When the meal was done, her father walked her to the porch, the lantern light casting shadows across his face. "You've been uneasy," he said softly. "I see it in your eyes." She wanted to confess everything. To tell him about the prisoner, the ridge, the bundle hidden in the barn, but fear kept her quiet. If she spoke without proof, her words might break the trust her father had built with the men. And if she named the rope man openly, she knew he would not take it lightly. "I'm just tired," she said instead. Forcing a small smile, her father studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Rest well. Tomorrow will be harder than today. The land's changing. I can feel it." That night she woke to the sound of horses. She slipped from her bed and peered through the window. In the moonlight, she saw the rope man riding out, his figure dark against the pale earth. He carried something across his saddle, long and wrapped in cloth. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to wake her father, but she knew it would be useless. He trusted the rope man more than he trusted his own doubts. The next day, the unease grew into whispers. 2 ranch hands spoke of seeing smoke from another direction, far off but steady. They said it looked like signals, not campfires. The daughter felt her chest tighten. She thought of the Apache, of the way he had watched from the ridge, and wondered if the fires were part of something larger. As evening approached, a rider came to the ranch, a stranger from a nearby settlement. His horse was lathered with sweat, his voice quick with fear. He told of wagons attacked, of settlers fleeing, of a group of Apache warriors seen near the river. Her father listened, jaw tight, and ordered the men to prepare rifles and keep watch. But the daughter noticed something the others did not. As the rider spoke of warriors near the river, the rope man's eyes narrowed, not in surprise but in calculation. It was the look of someone confirming what he already knew. The air thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. That night the men kept lanterns burning and rifles close. The cattle shifted nervously in the fields, their movements restless. The daughter lay awake, her heart pounding with every sound. Somewhere beyond the fences, the Apache waited, and inside the walls, the rope man's secret grew heavier. At dawn, she walked to the well, hoping the cool morning air would calm her. But as she bent to draw water, she froze. In the dirt nearby lay a single feather, long and dark, tied with a strip of leather. It was not from their chickens, nor from any bird she had seen on the ranch. It was a sign, placed with intention. She glanced quickly toward the hills, but saw nothing. Still, the message was clear. Someone wanted her to know they were close. The day dragged on with a strange stillness. No one spoke much. The men stayed near the house, rifles leaning against doorframes, eyes on the horizon. The rope man went about his work quietly, yet she could feel the tension in his movements. He seemed to sense that something was coming, though whether he feared it or welcomed it. She could not tell. As the sun sank low, the daughter walked again to the ridge. She knew she should not, but the pull was too strong. When she reached the crest, she stopped, her breath catching. Below, in the valley, a small group of riders moved slowly through the grass. She could not see their faces, but their posture, their silence, told her they were Apache. And at the center of the group rode the man she had freed. He lifted his head, as if sensing her presence. And for a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. She stepped back, heart racing. Were they preparing to strike the ranch? Or had they come for something else? Something tied to the rope man's hidden past. As she turned to hurry back, she nearly stumbled into him. The rope man stood behind her, silent as stone, his face shadowed by the setting sun. She gasped, her hand clutching the knife at her belt. "You've been watching them?" he said quietly. She steadied herself, trying to keep her voice firm. "So have you." His lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "You don't know what's coming." The words chilled her more than the night air. She wanted to demand answers, but the sound of distant drums carried faintly on the wind, cutting through her thoughts. The Apache riders below had lit a fire, smoke rising steady and dark into the sky. The rope man stepped closer, his voice low. "You freed him. That choice belongs to you now. When they come, remember that." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked back toward the valley, where the fire burned brighter, where the Apache gathered. The rope man's shadow loomed beside her. For the first time she understood just how close the storm truly was. The ranch lay below, quiet in the twilight, its fences small against the endless land. She knew then that the days of silence were over. The circle was closing, and soon the clash between past and present, between family and betrayal, between mercy and vengeance, would erupt in a way none of them could escape. And as darkness swallowed the horizon, the rancher's daughter felt the air tighten around her, heavy with the weight of the choice she had made, and the reckoning that now marched toward her home. The fire in the valley burned deep into the night, its glow rising like a beacon that no one on the ranch could ignore. The men grew restless, moving between the house and the barn with rifles in hand, their voices hushed but sharp with unease. The cattle pressed close to the fences, uneasy in the stillness. The daughter stood near the porch, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes never leaving the dark ridges where the Apache gathered. She knew that what was coming could not be held off with fences or bullets. It had begun the moment she cut that rope, and now the end was rushing toward them. Her father sensed it too. He paced along the porch, his face stern, his jaw set with worry. Yet he did not ask her about the fire, nor about the shadows moving on the hills. He trusted the land to speak for itself, and it was speaking loudly now. The daughter wanted to tell him everything, but she also knew that words alone would not stop what was coming. The rope man was quiet, but she could feel his presence heavy in the air. He lingered near the barn, always close enough to watch, his eyes sharp, his posture to calm for the tension that gripped the others. It was as if he was waiting for a moment only he could see. She remembered the bundle hidden beneath the saddles, the necklace, the leather, the knife. Those items told a story that tied him to the Apache, though whether through blood, betrayal, or both, she could not yet tell. When dawn came, the valley was empty. The fire had burned down, leaving only faint smoke rising into the pale morning sky. The men muttered with relief, but it was short-lived. By midday, riders appeared on the horizon, not charging, not hiding, but moving slowly, deliberately, toward the ranch. There were perhaps a dozen of them, their horses steady, their figures tall and straight. At the front rode the Apache she had freed, his face calm, his eyes unreadable. Her father called the men to gather, rifles raised, their bodies tense. The daughter felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. She stepped forward without thinking, placing herself slightly ahead of the rifles. The riders halted a short distance from the fences. The leader dismounted slowly. It was the Apache she knew, the one whose rope she had cut. His movements were controlled, his gaze fixed not on the rifles, not on her father, but on the rope man standing at the edge of the group. For a long moment, the prairie was silent except for the wind. Then the Apache spoke, his words firm, carried in a tongue the daughter did not fully understand, but she did not need to. The way the rope man stiffened, the way his hand twitched toward the knife at his belt, told her enough. This was not the first time they had faced each other. There was history here, old and heavy, and it was now demanding to be answered. Her father's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "What's this about?" The rope man did not answer. His silence was louder than words. The Apache spoke again, his eyes never leaving the rope man. His tone carried the weight of judgment, of something long overdue. The daughter looked between them, her chest tight, her mind racing. She remembered the bundle, the hidden tokens of Apache life kept in secret. She remembered the threats, the warnings, the cold calm that had haunted the rope man's every step. At last, the rope man spoke, his voice low but edged with defiance. "This isn't your fight," he said to her father. "It never was. It's between me and him." Her father frowned, confusion flickering across his face. But before he could question, the Apache stepped closer, and in that instant the truth revealed itself without need of words. The rope man had once lived among the Apache. He had belonged to them in some way by blood or bond, but it turned against them. The tokens hidden in the barn were not trophies. They were remnants of a life abandoned, a past betrayed. The daughter's stomach turned as she understood. The prisoner she had freed had not been just any Apache. He had been bound by the rope man because their paths were tied by old wounds. Her act of mercy had reopened a wound that could not stay hidden. The standoff stretched into the hot stillness of the day. The ranch hands gripped their rifles, but her father raised a hand, keeping them steady. He was a man who believed in fairness, and even in that tense moment, he saw that this conflict was not his to settle. The rope man stepped forward, his eyes locked on the Apache. "You should have stayed gone," he said. The Apache's reply was quiet, but the weight of it struck heavier than any shout. His presence, his calm, spoke of patience that had waited for this reckoning. The daughter felt her breath catch as the two men stood facing each other. The ranch caught in the balance. She wanted to cry out, to stop it, but she knew this was beyond her. This was the clash of choices made long before she cut that rope. The moment snapped like a tightened wire. The rope man drew his knife, the blade flashing in the sun. The Apache did not flinch. The rifles of the ranch hands rose higher, but her father barked in order to hold. Dust swirled in the wind as the two men closed the distance, their history boiling to the surface, in silence more powerful than any words. The fight that followed was not long, but it carried the weight of years. The Apache moved with precision, every step deliberate, while the rope man's strikes carried the desperation of a man fighting not only for his life but for a past he could no longer hide. The daughter watched, her chest tight, knowing that whichever man fell, her world would be forever changed. At last it ended. The rope man lay on the ground, his knife fallen from his hand, his body still. The Apache stood above him, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes steady. He did not gloat, did not speak of victory. He simply turned, his gaze meeting the daughter's once more. In that look was acknowledgement, not of debt or gratitude, but of truth. He mounted his horse without another word. The other riders followed, their movements silent, their presence fading into the horizon as quickly as they had appeared. The ranch hands lowered their rifles, their faces pale. Her father stood frozen, his hand resting heavy on his hip. His eyes clouded with questions he might never have answered. The daughter stood still, her hands trembling. The knife she had once used to cut the rope, now feeling like a weight of iron. She knew then that her choice had set everything in motion. She had given mercy to one man, and in doing so, uncovered the hidden rot inside her own home. Her father turned to her, his voice quiet, almost broken. "You knew." She nodded, unable to speak. He sighed, shoulders slumping with the weight of all that had unfolded. Yet in his eyes was not anger, but something else, a weary understanding that life on the frontier was never simple. That truth often came at a cost. The days that followed were quieter. The men went back to their work, though their eyes still drifted off into the horizon. The rope man was buried on a small rise near the ranch, his grave marked only by a stone. No words were spoken over it. His story was written in silence, choices that could never be undone. The Apache did not return, yet the daughter often felt his presence in the wind, in the wide open land that stretched endlessly around them. She thought of him not as enemy nor as savior, but as a reminder of the weight a single act of mercy could carry. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. The cattle, the fences, the endless sky, but nothing was the same. The daughter had learned that safety was fragile, that trust could be broken even in one's own home, and that choices made in moments of quiet could echo across the land. And though the ranch stood firm, she knew the story of the rope and the Apache would live within her forever. A shadow and a lesson carried by the prairie winds,